Great. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. First, I'd like to thank the library for having me do this evening. But just as important, all of you who were brave enough to show up to watch this program from the safety of wherever you're watching it from. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. So bear with me one moment as we get that going. There, you should be able to see the screen now. A nice log cabin covered in winter snow. So, as you heard, my name is Chad Lewis, and I'll be your presenter for this program this evening. And although my background is actually in the field of psychology, for the last 25 years, I've been traveling the world in search of the strange and unusual. Everything from hunting for vampires in Transylvania, looking for the Loch Ness Monster, crop circles, UFOs, alien abductions, weird people, odd places, you name it. If it's just a little strange and offbeat, I've traveled around the world in search of these oddities. And what I discovered on my travels is that many times you can avoid these places. You don't have to go there. But for those of us living in the Midwest, it's nearly impossible to avoid winter. Well, as we've seen the last month, anywhere in the US, it's nearly impossible to avoid winter. So that's what we're going to explore this evening. Of course, when a lot of people think of winter, they think of shoveling out the snow. Maybe you like winter recreation, ice fishing. In the Midwest, we tend to think of winter as crazy football games outdoors. But I'm going to be talking about a different winter this evening, a more bizarre, more entertaining, certainly weirder, and sometimes more sinister folklore behind the darkest days of the year. So, for the next 45 or 50 minutes or so, we're going to take a tour of some of the weirdest winter folklore and legends that you may have never heard of. Of course, today many people think of Halloween as being the creepiest and weirdest time of the year. And yes, it is. But tonight, after you hear stories of witches, werewolves, trolls, and many other things about winter, you might think winter is by far the weirdest time of the year. But if you'd rather not see a more entertaining and darker side of winter, it's still not too late for you to throw on a Hallmark Christmas movie instead. But I advise you to stick around because we're going to explore some truly fascinating stories this evening, starting with Old Man Winter himself or itself, the bringer of cold and ice. For many people, it's just a story, but for other cultures, it's a being. And in Minnesota, it is thought to be Wayzata. And if you head up to the middle of Minnesota in Mille Lacs Lake, you will come to where they believe the bringer of ice and snow resides. It's out on the lake at a place called Spirit Island, thought to be a sacred area of rocks in the middle of the lake. Some say in the summer when you go by, you can hear the rocks singing or music coming from the rocks. Others claim the rocks will move on their own. This is where the bringer of ice is thought to reside, where every fall it battles summer and fall and then recedes every spring in the battle. But there's another legend out here of the Pledge of Honesty, that if you come out to the rocks and make the Pledge of Honesty, if you lie anywhere in the world, a rock will fall out of the sky and hit you and you will die. So, of course, a couple years ago, I had to make the winter trek out there to make my pledge of honesty. It's about 3 miles out from the shoreline to get there. As I was walking there, about midway through, my right boot got very wet. Maybe some snow had gotten in or some ice had melted in my boot, but it was so freezing cold that day that I didn't stop to assess the situation. I wanted to get there, make my pledge of honesty, and then hike back, which I did. Later that afternoon, when I met up with my colleagues at our winter lodging for the night, I started unloading my gear, and I realized it wasn't snow that had turned my boot wet. It was blood. My foot had been cut somehow out in my boot. Okay, photo's gone. Out in the trek to make my pledge of honesty. But if it was the curse getting me, I feel that I got off light with nothing more than a wounded foot rather than a rock falling on my head and killing me. I'll leave it up to you to venture out to Spirit Island and make your own pledge of honesty. And if you survive that, you have to prepare for winter solstice. The winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, the longest night of the year, is one of those nights where people thought spirits, especially evil beings, could come back and terrorize you. It was one of those special nights where they were the most powerful of the year. Amongst those, people feared witches, which is why on the winter solstice, it was advised that you would keep a fire going in your fireplace or your hearth the entire time of winter solstice to ward off witches and other evil spirits. But on a greater superstitious level, the fireplace was not only where you cooked, you got your warmth in the old days, but it was also where the little people were said to congregate. What we would consider fairies, gnomes, goblins, trolls, the hidden people, the good folks, the sprites, these little beings that would venture out in the winter and come to your home. It was advised that you leave out an offering for them, whether it was some tobacco, some candy, maybe some bakery sweets, or even some spirits left out so you would appease them and not be cursed by these little people who usually roamed farm to farm during the winter. If you did not heed that advice and some of your livestock went ill, or suddenly you were tripping over things you couldn't see, that wasn't just you being clumsy or a bad farmer. It was the curse of the little people. So leave out some offerings all winter long so you will not be cursed by these beings. And you can imagine how tough the old days were in the winter. Usually families would be huddled up in their one-room cabin, might not leave the cabin for months on end. The weather's so bad, they would be stuck inside, which led to one of my favorite winter traditions, and that was telling ghost stories by the fire, with little other entertainment possibilities, especially in the evening. They would sit around the fire and try to tell the scariest and most bizarre ghost story during the winter months. One of my favorite parts of these ghost stories was the legend that if you could not see your head on your shadow, it meant you were going to die within the next year. So I can just imagine families scrambling for the best location. So you may want to see your shadow and make certain that it has its head while you're telling ghost stories by the fire. And if you survive the winter solstice, you'll get to Christmas time. Those who participate and celebrate the holiday of Christmas, they have fond memories of it, sitting around with your family, exchanging heartfelt gifts, a calmer, quieter, more peaceful time surrounded by your loving family. But of course, That's not the type of Christmas I'm going to talk about this evening. I'm going to be talking about a different Christmas time, including that of the Yule log. Today, this is what most people think is a Yule log. But in the old days, it was very important to have your Yule log, and you'd have to have it burning in your fireplace the entire 12 days of Christmas. It was expected that you'd go out on your property and find the biggest tree you could cut down and haul it back to your home. You'd put the large end in first into your fireplace, and you'd light it with the embers from last year's Yule log. Then, as it kept burning slowly throughout the 12 days, you would just put more and more of the tree in your fireplace, warding off the evil spirits that were everywhere and powerful during this time. Today, a lot of people are not out on their property cutting down trees and dragging them in their house, which is how some people have substituted candles being lit for the 12 days. Some going to the lengths of putting the candles in their sink to avoid fires when they leave. Others have switched to battery-powered candles, hoping that that light is enough to keep away and ward off the evil spirits. And if you put candles around your home, hopefully you'll make it to Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve is full of superstitions, one being that Christmas Eve is the one night where animals of all sorts can talk in a language that you can understand. But it is advised that you do not go and eavesdrop on them because one, they'll only be talking bad about you, but two, it is thought to bring bad luck. Others say if you sneak a peek, you will see animals kneeling in honor of the animals that were kneeling at the Savior's birth. But if you'd rather not venture out onto a farm on Christmas Eve, you can also sit under a pine tree. Legend tells that on Christmas Eve, if you sit under a pine tree, you will hear angels singing and beautiful music coming from them. But this is not seen as a good omen because it's believed that if you hear angels singing under the tree, you will meet angels very soon as your death will be short in coming. It's also said that at midnight, you can pour water into wine just like Jesus did. But again, it's advised that you do not drink this because it will only bring the Grim Reaper closer to you. And if you survive all those things, at midnight, you have to open up a door or a window to allow the Christmas spirit inside your home. If you do not, you will not fully engage in the spirit of the season. It's also on Christmas Eve where it is said that bees will be singing carols. Now, I don't know if they're just buzzing the tune of a carol or if they're actually singing it, but that's the old folklore that they'll be singing carols on Christmas Eve. And speaking of carols, many believe caroling was done to provide a sense of community and joy throughout the town, which it was. But on a deeper and more important level, caroling was done to ward off evil spirits, which is why the earliest carolers were as loud as they could be. They would often beat pots and pans, even shoot firearms into the air to make as much ruckus as they could in order to ward off all of those evil spirits that were lurking in the shadow of the darkness, which is the same reason that we hung up the evergreens. Not only were they a symbol of life, being able to survive throughout the winter, the holly, the mistletoe, the ivy, they were fertility symbols as well, but they were meant to ward off evil spirits, not only because they were prickly physically, but because of their supernatural abilities. You would hang these all over your house, mainly to keep away witches. It's hard to overstate how afraid of witches our ancestors were, which is why they went to great lengths to avoid them in the winter season, including putting up a horseshoe over the entrance of your home. And you would have to put the horseshoe, what many people believe is upside down, like it is here. This would ward off spirits. If you wanted good luck, you would hang your horseshoe what we consider the right way, because all the good luck would fall into the horseshoe and stay there. But if you had it upside down, the good luck would not settle there, but you would be safe from witches. So you have to ask yourself whether you need protection from witches or if you need good luck, and then hang your horseshoe accordingly. Another tip is it's always advised that you enter and exit from the same door of a building. You never want to exit from a door you did not walk in, because you'll be bringing all the bad energy of that place with you when you leave, rather than using one entrance. Just a little public service announcement for you. And finally, we get to the most iconic part of Christmas. Whether you celebrate the holiday or not, everybody is familiar with Santa Claus. Known throughout the world by many different names, this is what we view Santa today. In the old days, he was seen more as a jolly little elf like he's pictured in this drawing on the right side here. But today, this is how we view Santa Claus. And everybody's familiar with Santa's story. He has the magical reindeer that help him. He has the wonderful Mrs. Claus. And of course, all the elves that make the toys for the children. But many people don't know he has a right-hand man, or as I like to call, an enforcer that comes with him, because it's Santa's job to reward all of the good behaving children. But his friend, Krampus, his job was to punish the naughty behaving children. Krampus' story comes from the old countries of Europe, where he would often accompany Saint Nicholas as he made his rounds to help the children. Of course, Saint Nicholas would give children fruits and candies and coins when they put their shoes out for him. But it was Krampus's job to punish the naughty children. Now, here in the United States, if you're ill-behaved, your parents would say, Santa will bring you coal in your stocking, which in the old days wouldn't have been that bad. You could burn the coal and heat your place. But Krampus took a little different approach. He showed up with St. Nicholas, who rewarded the good, and he brought his switch with him. And he'd often slash at the children with this switch. Many times, if they were terribly ill-behaved, he would grab them, put them into his bucket or basket, and he would take them away to his lair, and they would never be seen or heard from again. Quite a bit different than getting coal in your stocking. Believe it or not, in the old days, people used to send each other Krampus greeting cards for the season of Christmas. They would often have a picture or an illustration of Krampus, usually depicted abusing some young child, and then it would have on the front, greetings from Krampus, and they would be sent during the holiday season to your friends and loved ones. This is a tradition I continue on to this very day. As many of my friends and family probably unhappily can attest to, I send out Krampus cards every single year. And we celebrate Krampus on the evening of December 5th into December 6th, because that's St. Nicholas Day. And many cultures and places around the world now celebrate with Krampus festivals. One of my favorites is in Milwaukee, where hundreds of people show up for the Krampus parade, trying to get switched and hit by Krampus during the festival. Now, the bad news is we missed it. It was December 5th. But the good news is that gives most of you listening tonight an entire year to get your behavior in order and to turn around things so you're not on Krampus's list for next year. And if you survive Krampus, you may have to deal with another otherworldly creature called Belsnickel. And Belsnickel is popular with the Pennsylvania Dutch out in eastern United States. Very similar to Krampus, he shows up with a whip and a bag, punishing naughty children and rewarding good children. But let's move away from sinister monsters that will carry you away in their bucket to something more pleasant. Birthdays, happy birthday, parties to celebrate your arrival here on Earth. What could be more wholesome than a birthday party? Well, it depends when you were born, because if you were born or you know somebody who was born during the 12 days of Christmas, which, depending on which calendar you go by, are usually these dates. Because it is said anyone born during these dates is more likely to be a werewolf. The reasoning was that being born so close to the celebration of the birth of the Savior, that you were taking away all the attention, therefore you are going to be cursed. Thanks to my good friend and colleague, Linda Godfrey, my home state of Wisconsin is now known as the werewolf capital of the world. It began when Linda started receiving reports of people traveling down a small stretch of road called Bray Road. There, usually at night, but not always, they would see, for a lack of a better term, a werewolf. Giant, 7-8 feet tall, pointed ears, long muzzle, deep down, dark matted down fur. And these reports come from all over the Midwest. Right outside of Fort Dodge, this bridge is thought to be inhabited by a werewolf. In Effingham, Illinois, this old cemetery with caves indented are thought to be the layers of these giant werewolf type creatures. But the good news is, if you know somebody born on these dates, that outside of charging at a couple vehicles, these creatures seem to be just as afraid of witnesses as witnesses are of them. And rather than attack, they simply prefer to scurry back into the underbrush undetected. So the good news is that if you go out looking for these creatures, most likely you won't be killed. Well, 50-50. Do so at your own risk. Hopefully you survive a werewolf attack and make it to the celebration of New Year's Eve. Just like on Christmas Eve, at midnight on New Year's Eve, you are required to open a window or a door, not only to allow in the good luck of the new year, but to allow the terrible luck and the terrible givings of the previous year. And being that our previous year was 2020, most people were happy to open their window. In the old days, they would take it a step further. They would have bonfires. They would shoot into the air trying to murder the previous year and trying to bring in the new year with a clean slate. Again, I don't advise you to go shooting around your neighborhood trying to bring in the new year. I don't know how that excuse would go over with the local authorities. Today, many people have forgotten the old lumberjack industry. Yes, lumber industry is still going today, but nothing like the old days, where during the winter months, thousands of men would leave their families, head up into the North Woods to a lumber camp, and spend all winter cutting wood to earn money to bring back to the farm or to buy more livestock and land. It was done exclusively in the winter for several reasons. One, you didn't have to worry about all of the Midwest mosquitoes and wood ticks and other bugs. Two, it was much easier to use the icy roads to haul large quantities of lumber down to the riverbanks. And then you would wait for the snow to melt in the spring. It would rise up the river, raise it up enough where you could then throw the logs in and let them go down to all the sawmills at the lumber towns along the rivers. It was also done in the winter because many of them were farmers. They would work all season and then go into the woods again to earn money for their families. But they had a lot of troubles with winter, including a creature they had to avoid called the snow snake. This was a lumberjack creature said to have migrated here from Siberia. It hibernated all summer long. It was pure white, and it would come out in the winter, and you could not see it on the snow. And if it bit you, you would die, not due to the venom of the bite, but you would actually freeze to death. The only antidote, the only cure for a snow snake bite was that of a shot of whiskey. I can just imagine how many lumberjacks were bit by snow snakes just to get a nip off of the bottle. But of all the lumberjacks out there, without a doubt, the most famous is that of Paul Bunyan. Everybody knows the story of Paul Bunyan. Keep in mind, Minnesota claims to be the birthplace of Paul Bunyan. But before all of you get too excited, so do the states of Wisconsin, Maine, Michigan, Vermont, Canada, the country of Canada, of course, and many, many others. But we all know for tonight, Paul and Babe were from Minnesota. And a lot of people know the exploits of Paul and Babe, but they don't know how Paul and Babe met. They actually met during the winter of the blue snow. The snow was blue because the weather was so terrible that people were cursing up a never-ending blue streak that turned the snow blue. That's when Paul found Babe. It was so cold that winter. What's that? How cold was it? It was so cold that winter that fish grew fur to stay warm. It was so cold that winter. How cold was it? It was so cold that at night, your words would freeze in the air. You'd have to wait until the sunrise in the morning to hear what your friend was talking about. That's how cold it was the winter of the blue snow. And Paul found Babe in the snow. He had already turned blue. So Paul took him in, and like everything around Paul Bunyan, he grew to an enormous size, and Paul and Babe have been moving around the Northwoods ever since. If you ever head up on vacation or to a cabin in the Northwoods of the Midwest, you might still catch a glimpse of Paul and Babe roaming around the heavily forested areas. Believe it or not, there's a big fight in the United States, not over blue states and red states, but of cold states. The self-proclaimed title of Icebox of the Nation is being fought over, weirdly enough, by several different cities around the United States. In Michigan, one in Colorado, one out in Wyoming, and of course, International Falls in Minnesota that has the legal right to call themselves the Icebox of the Nation. And if you've ever been to International Falls, you certainly know why it is the Icebox of the Nation. They've recorded some terrible cold temperatures there in the winter. And the winter itself brought along problems, even for dying. Today, if you die in the winter, no big deal. Bring in the backhoe, dig your grave, go about the business. But in the old days, that wasn't possible, which is why they had the receiving vaults or holding vaults, these structures that were usually indented into the side of a graveyard. This is where, if you died in the winter, they would keep your body until spring thaw came and they could dig up a grave for you. There were some seasons when the weather was so bad, people spent 6 months in these receiving vaults, which of course led to many stories of them being haunted. One of my favorites is in Marshalltown, Iowa, at Riverside Cemetery. The legend here is that years ago, a man buried his wife in a receiving vault. The problem was he buried her while she was still living. She was alive. And now her vengeful spirit haunts the old receiving vault. Passerbys hear rapping and knocking coming from the door. They've even seen the handle shake as though someone from the inside was moving it. Of course, there's no one on the inside, at least not anyone who's alive. I had no idea when I was younger that you can affect the amount of snow that you get. In fact, you can even help with school closings and delays, because if you're a kid and you want a snow day, there are steps you can take to help ensure this, including sleeping with a spoon under your pillow. How it works, I have no idea, but people swear that it will help bring upon a snowstorm. Or you can wear your pajamas inside out or backwards, or both if you want, to help bring about a snow day. You can also throw ice cubes into the toilet. One ice cube for every inch of snow that you want the snow to bring. And that will bring about the number of snowstorms. You can also predict signs, if you know where to look, to tell you whether or not we're going to have a hard winter. But some of them are very tricky, like determining whether a caterpillar is extra bushy, because if it is, that means a harsh winter. Or if a squirrel's tail is extra bushy, or if a cornstalk is extra thick, or the hair on the neck of a cow is extra thick. Now, you're probably thinking, how in the heck am I going to determine whether a caterpillar is extra bushy for the season, which most of us would not be able to do. But Mother Nature did provide one easier sign of a hard winter, and that is two woodpeckers being spotted in the same tree means we're going to have a very terrible winter. And the season itself is responsible for so much mishap and misfortune, and even death. A lot of you might not recognize this place in Iowa. Sorry, bad joke, cornfield in Iowa, but you will recognize this place when I tell you this is the spot where music died. It was back in 1959 when Ritchie Valens, Buddy Holly, and J.P. Richardson, the Big Bopper, were all playing the Winter Dance Party. They had just finished a gig at the Surf Ballroom in downtown Clear Lake, Iowa. Buddy Holly was upset because their tour bus kept breaking down and freezing up on him. So he hired a plane to take him and the two other musicians to the Fargo, North Dakota area for their next gig. The next morning, when the plane never arrived, they sent out a search party. They didn't have to go far. Just north of Clear Lake, they found the crashed remains of the aircraft. All three of the artists and the young pilot were dead on impact. Some years later, they put a makeshift memorial for the artist out there. And if you follow this trail about a quarter mile back, you'll come to the actual site of the crash. They put up a memorial for the artist whose music will live on forever. And if you've never been to the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, I highly recommend you go. Not only for the insane amount of rock and roll history they have there, but also to experience a bit of Americana as well. But a lot of people get depressed during the winter months. In the United States, millions of people suffer every season from seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. The lack is thought of vitamin D and sunlight and exercise and cabin fever all bring about the sense of depression, which sometimes can have deadly consequences, including this home in northern Minnesota. This is the old Heritage House in Embarrass, Minnesota. The legend is many years ago, a family lived in this house, and during a harsh Minnesota winter, the father snapped. He went crazy, went psychotic. You know how people in Minnesota get in the winter. So when spring came along, he took his young son down to the Embarrass River and made him go out into the water, where the young son met his death in the cold, icy waters of the river. And now the legend tells that when you go out there and park your car on the bridge, Not only will you see the ghostly image of that young boy, but many witnesses claim that he will act like a siren, trying to entice you in to help him, saying things like, "Help me, I can't swim. Save me, please, don't let me drown." Legend tells if you're foolish enough or maybe brave enough to go into the water, you'll be pulled under by the spirit of that young boy and spend eternity in the river. It's out in the middle of nowhere. Livestock of the surrounding area make some pretty interesting noises. But if that's not enough to scare you, you may want to do what I did. About midnight, take a nice little dip into the Embarrass River, and I can tell you that every little branch or twig that passes by your legs is going to have your mind conjuring up images of this young boy grabbing at your legs and trying to pull you down. This next legend I'm going to talk about is one you might not want to know about. It is certainly one you don't want to say its name, because many cultures believe that merely saying the name of this next thing is enough to put you on its radar. That when you go looking for the weird will come looking for you. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to say the name. The creature, spirit, legend I'm talking about is that of the Windigo, the cannibalistic monster of the North. It began with the First Nations people of Canada, where they called it many different names and many different spellings. But the creature was terrifying, somewhere between 8 and as tall as it wanted to be. It was always very thin, skeletal looking. Sometimes it had no mouth or lips because in its insatiable hunt for human flesh, it has consumed its own body. It can show up in a flesh and blood type and devour you. But even more terrifying, it can show up and possess you and slowly turn you into a Windigo. We have hundreds of documented cases of people killing one another because they believed that person was turning Windigo or going Windigo, and that if they wouldn't have killed them, the entire community, town, or tribe would have been taken over and devoured by this Windigo. But you don't have to head into Canada to see the Windigo. In fact, you can't get into Canada right now, but you can get to Minnesota, Ross, Minnesota, way up by Roseau and War Road. Today, there's not much there in the village of Ross. But back in the 1800s, this is what it looked like. It was called Indian Village because several hundred native peoples lived there, along with some white pioneers, one of which was Jake Nelson, who luckily for us kept a detailed journal about his life in the Roseau Valley. He talked about mysterious will-o'-the-wisp lights that would appear, dance around the community, and vanish. But he also talked about the native people's belief in the Windigo. They believed in Minnesota that this thing was a harbinger of death, a death omen, meaning that if you saw it, much like seeing or hearing the Irish banshee, it meant you or someone you knew was going to die very shortly. Jake Nelson thought it was nothing more than superstition. That is, until he saw the creature himself. And sure enough, the very next day, an elder in the community passed away. Jake Nelson reported 3 sightings of this monster, and every time it was seen, it was always white-furred, white-skinned, or white-clothed, and it accompanied a death that was in the community. But many people think that it's nothing more than an old legend. But I've talked to several people in modern times who believe they've encountered the Windigo up in the Ross area. I've been up there in the summer and winter looking for the monster, and luckily, or maybe knock on wood, unluckily, the creature has not come for me. But if you're itching to tempt fate, my favorite place to see or experience the Windigo is that just east of Bemidji in a place called Lake Windigo. It's a lake on an island in a lake, which makes it an oddity in its own right, featured here in Ripley's Believe It or Not cartoon as the lake within a lake. Many contend that Star Island is haunted. There have been several books written about the lake. One of the weirdest stories tells of early peoples going out to the lake. The women set up around the shoreline, setting up base camp and cooking, while the men went in to hunt for game. When they didn't come back, the women went looking for them and supposedly found them all strung up in a tree, skinned dead. They left the island, said it was cursed, bad medicine. They would never return. Those who came out to the island never found those bodies of the missing men. Others tell tales of finding gigantic holes in the ice of Lake Windigo with huge footprints coming out of the ice and walking to the island as though the Windigo came out and went to the island in search of prey. So back in the winter of 2015, I was joined by my two colleagues, Kevin Nelson on your left there, and Noah Voss on the right. We made a winter expedition to Lake Windigo. You can't tell, but that's me there in the middle. The reason you can't tell is it's about 30 degrees below zero with the wind. For several hours, we had to hike across the lake, carrying our gear on sled and backpack just to get to the island. I'll give you a taste of what that was like. Now, you can see that we were all tethered together. Just in case one of us fell through, the other two could pull us out. And when we got to the island, Noah on the left there, Noah and I decided we were going to spend the expedition in our frozen tent. But my colleague Kevin on the right, there he is, he wanted more of an adventure, which is odd. He doesn't look like he likes adventure. But anyway, he was going to sleep with his hammock in 30-degree below zero weather. First thing we had to do is get a fire going, not only for heat and warmth and light, but to keep our tallow hot. Tallow is an animal fat, and one of the legends is that you can kill the Windigo by pouring hot tallow down its throat. It will defrost its icy heart, melt it, and it will die. Just how you're supposed to pour it down its throat, I'll leave that up to you, but we had our tallow hot the entire expedition. And then we made our way to the middle of the lake. Many believe the lake itself is the Windigo. Many children have drowned in the lake, and it is said that the Windigo will snatch you off of the shoreline and pull you under. So one night, we had a wonderful base camp fire going. Noah and I decided to walk to the middle of the lake and try to conjure up the Windigo. But as we were walking, we were filming it. And Noah paused and he said, "Our boots are crunching the snow too loud. No one's going to hear what we're talking about. We need to be quiet." And while we were paused there, something on our left caught our attention and startled us. Let's take a look.
Okay, see, I'm trying to be quiet for...
What is it?
Don't have it. Don't have eyes or anything.
Take another look.
Okay, see, I'm trying to be quiet for...
What is it?
Don't have it. Don't have eyes or anything.
Now, we didn't see anything. It was probably a deer or a big bird of prey or an owl. But even though we didn't see anything, I can tell you it got our adrenaline going for the expedition, so much that my colleague Kevin slept with his axe there on the left side just in case the Windigo appeared. Unfortunately, Kevin was not killed by the Windigo during this expedition, so I don't have proof that it was actually there. But if you're going to go to Lake Windigo, I recommend you do so in the summer, as you'll have a much more pleasant experience than you would if you went during the winter time. And the legend of the Windigo continues on. You might think it's an old superstition from a long time ago, but many cultures refuse to build snowmen on their lands. believing that it will either invite a Windigo or the snowman will turn into a Windigo, which is the same concept behind the idea of the Pennsylvania Dutch burning their scarecrow before Halloween. Because if you do not burn your scarecrow, it will come to life and torment you. Same goes for the snowman. So as I'm running low on time this evening, I'm sure a lot of you are saying, Chad, these are fascinating stories, but that's all they are. Superstitions from a long time ago. I have nothing to be afraid of today. With modern science and medicine, we know better. Well, for that, I encourage all of you to check your forecast for this evening. And tonight, when all of you put your head down on your pillows and you hear the wind rustling outside your window, I want you to ask yourself, is it possible, just maybe, that wasn't the wind howling outside your window? And if you want more information, my website, Chad Lewis Research, has more than you could ever want or need. But I really hope your adventure doesn't end here tonight at the program. Grab one of my books, go on your own adventure of the Midwest. And when you do, I think you'll discover that we live in one heck of a weird area. And I mean this in a good way. You're going to see things you've never seen. You'll meet some odd people. And along the way, you might just discover that the scariest thing out there is usually yourself. So with that, I want to thank the library for having this program. It's very rare you can come to a program like this at no cost. So if you like programs like this, let them know so you get more of these. If you didn't like tonight's program, let them know so you get fewer. But either way, they should be applauded for having me here tonight, because I can't think of a time in America's history in which the library has played a more important role than it does in today's world. With everything going on with the pandemic, societal issues, politics, the library is that fabric that holds our communities together, a real treasure for anyone who has one in their community. Just as a show of my appreciation, if you're looking to get any of my books, just type in the coupon code library at my website and you'll save 20% off just because the library is so amazing. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. You can either, if you have a question, comment, or story of your own, either put it in the chat room or unmute yourself. And I would love to hear if you have any winter legends, lore, or experiences. So I'm going to stop the share and turn it back to the library. Mr. Schaefer watching from the city of mystery and romance.
Am I unmuted there?
You certainly are.
Oh, that's pretty good. Hey, that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that.
Any questions, comments, or stories from anyone? And keep in mind, this is just the tip of the iceberg for these legends. And some of these legends, they really linger. I spoke with a woman in northern Minnesota by Grand Marais when I was up at their wonderful library there. And she was in her 80s, and she had a story from when she was a kid. She said her father used to tell her and all of her playmates that if they ever heard a kettle being struck in the woods, they needed to get home because that was the sign the Windigo was coming. And of course, she said she never heard it, but it stuck with her 70 plus years later. She still remembered that, and it still terrified her. That's the power of these legends. Someone needs whiskey, I see.
Well, I think they got
Still
this like
stink. And that was a delicacy, if you will, because most lumber camps did not allow spirits or beer or anything the people to drink because, well, you get 50 men together in a small little bunkhouse where there's one little pipe for the stove or the fireplace. And after a hard day of work, they put all their wet clothes, wool, up by the fire and they're spitting tobacco and smoking their pipes. You can imagine the smell coming from that bunkhouse. I really wish I could travel back in time and just pop my head in there for a minute and then say nope and pop out. But I see Mr. Six Gun in the audience as well. A lot of you crazy Minnesotans here tonight. Wonderful. And I have to say that even though Paul Bunyan was first, the first oral tales of Paul came from a lumber camp out of Tomahawk, Wisconsin in the 1880s. The first printed story of Paul came from a Duluth newspaper in 1904. So even though people fight over who has Paul, without a doubt, Minnesota has the best Paul Bunyan roadside attractions in the entire country, probably the entire world, from Paul Bunyan's alleged grave to his footprints, to his bobber, to his hunting rifle. Even the 10,000 lakes were said to have been made by Paul and Babe's footprints as they walked around your great state.
I've got one thing for you, Chad.
Wonderful.
So are you familiar with the history of the St. Paul Winter Carnival by chance?
I am not.
So 1886 was the first one, and they had this reporter out from New York who had come into Minnesota to just see what was going on out there with this new settlement on the Mississippi. And they had reported back in their newspaper that it was completely unfit for anybody to live there. It was ungodly cold, and they were the most stubborn, foolish people in the country. So as a result, the city organizers said, you know what, not only are we going to continue living here, we're going to have a 2-week-long festival to celebrate how stubborn we are and how we can deal with the cold weather. And that's just been going ever since.
Did you say that year was 2018 when they had the stubborn people in the... No?
Yeah.
That's a wonderful story. I love that. And people take, I guess, pride in how cold it is when we hear of our friends and family in Florida saying it got to 50 tonight, or
Yeah.
wow, it got to 30, where you're thinking you see people in shorts in 30 around here. Any other questions or comments before we end the program? Otherwise, again, thank you all for coming and keep an eye out.
All right. Thanks, Chad.
Thank you, Chad.
Got your book. I'm not quite through it yet, but pretty good so far. And once I'm done with it, it'll be available at the library too.